Belly redefined what a hip-hop movie could look like, and most people still don't know how insane the story behind it really is. In the next few minutes, I'm going to walk you through 5 things about this cult classic that will completely change how you see it. Stick around, because I'm saving one jaw-dropping bonus fact for the end that almost nobody talks about. So let's dive in, because the list starts right now. Number 1, Nas wrote, "The blueprint Belly opens like a music video and closes like a sermon, and that whiplash is exactly why it still gets talked about today." Everyone credits Hype Williams for turning Belly into a visual masterpiece, but the real backbone of the story came from somewhere else entirely. Nas wasn't just the star of this movie, he helped shape the entire narrative alongside Hype Williams and his childhood friend Anthony Bodden. The spiritual battle at the center of the film, the pull between the streets and something greater, came straight from Nas's own experience growing up in Queensbridge. This wasn't Hollywood parachuting a script onto a rap artist. Nas fed his real perspective into every page, and it shows in his character Sincere, a man who reads books, questions the game, and dreams of getting out, while his best friend sinks deeper into the life. Most rappers who show up in movies are just hired talent reading someone else's lines. Nas did the opposite. He helped build the foundation and then stepped into the story as one of its 2 leads, which is part of why Belly still feels so personal more than 2 decades later. Compare that to most rap-adjacent films of the era, where artists were essentially cast for name recognition and handed dialogue that had nothing to do with their real lives. Belly flipped that formula, letting the person living the experience help write it, which is part of why the film still feels raw instead of manufactured. Even the film's more surreal, dreamlike stretches trace back to that same instinct, since Nas wanted the movie to feel less like a straightforward crime story and more like a meditation on choosing a different life. That authenticity is exactly why the film hit different from anything else in theaters that year. And it's only the beginning of how unconventional this production really was. Number 2, DMX almost never got the role. Casting Belly wasn't as simple as picking 2 rappers and pointing a camera at them, and one decision in particular almost never happened. Before Get At Me Dog ever hit the radio, the man who became Tommy Bundy was a total unknown to the mainstream. When Hype Williams cast DMX and Belly, X hadn't dropped a debut album yet. He had no platinum plaques, no arena tours, nothing that made him a safe box office bet. Hype has said he took serious heat from the studio for the choice because executives wanted a proven name attached to the lead role. According to Hype, it was Irv Gotti who convinced him DMX didn't need a script at all because his real life basically was the character, the rage, the loyalty, the internal war. All of it was already living inside DMX before the cameras ever rolled. Instead of hiring an actor to play a troubled man from Yonkers, the production essentially hired a troubled man from Yonkers to play himself under a different name. It's a gamble that could have sunk the entire film if it went wrong, especially for a low-budget production that couldn't afford reshoots or a second lead if the first choice didn't land. Studios usually play it safe with an unproven lead, but Hype essentially bet the entire film on instinct instead of a resume. Instead, it turned into one of the most magnetic performances in hip-hop cinema history, and it happened before most of the world even knew his name. If you are enjoying this, take 2 seconds and leave a like. Subscribe if you want more videos like this. That support really motivates my work and helps a lot with bringing more content. Number 3. The actor who could have replaced DMX fans have spent years dissecting every casting choice in Belly, but this particular what if didn't surface until long after the film became a classic. This secret stayed buried for 2 decades before Hype Williams finally let it slip on a public stage. At ComplexCon in 2018, Hype revealed that if DMX hadn't worked out for the role of Tommy Bundy, his backup choice was Jay-Z. Nas, sitting right next to him, said he had no idea Jay was ever part of that conversation. Picture that version of the film, Jay-Z running through a blacklight tunnel as the lead of a gritty street saga instead of DMX. This was 1997, years before any tension between Jay and Nas. Just 2 future legends who almost shared the screen in one of the most iconic hood films ever made. Jay-Z later admitted he wasn't fully comfortable acting at the time because he was too focused on looking composed on camera, which speaks to how different his mindset was before he became the mogul we know today. Hype ultimately fought for DMX's raw, unpolished energy instead, and that decision changed the direction of both of their careers. It's worth noting this was purely a casting conversation and not any kind of falling out between the two artists, since Nas and Jay-Z's public tension didn't begin until years later. Jay stayed behind the microphone, X became a movie star, and hip-hop history took a very different turn than it almost could have. Number 4. The opening scene nearly broke the budget. Ask anyone who's seen Belly what they remember most, and there's a good chance the answer is the very first scene, not the ending. Belly had a budget of just $3 million, which is less than plenty of music videos cost today, and Hype Williams blew through most of it before the story even really started. The now iconic tunnel nightclub sequence, all blacklight glow, slow-motion bodies, and a violent heist ate an enormous chunk of the film's entire budget in just the first few days of shooting. That opening was filmed inside the tunnel, a real and legendary club on Manhattan's West Side that operated from 1986 until 2001 and hosted basically every major name in New York nightlife at some point. Hype didn't just shoot inside it, he transformed the space into a neon fever dream unlike anything hip-hop cinema had shown before. It became widely regarded as one of the most visually striking openings in the genre, but the production nearly couldn't afford to finish the rest of the movie because of how much money and time it consumed. For comparison, plenty of independent films from that same era stretched a similar budget across the entire runtime, while Belly poured a huge percentage of its resources into roughly the first 7 minutes alone, essentially treating the opening like its own short film rather than just a first scene. That's an almost unheard of gamble for a debut director, betting that one unforgettable sequence could carry a film even if the rest of the budget got tight. 7 minutes of pure style almost took down the entire production before the story even got moving. Number 5. The hidden movie reference inside Belly. Not every detail in this film is meant to be noticed on a first watch, and this next one might be the best example of that in the entire movie. There's a blink and you miss it detail early in the film that most viewers scroll right past. In an early scene, Tommy Joaquin seen Tommy is home alone playing pool, and on his massive television screen he's watching Gummo, Harmony Korine's disturbing 1997 film about teenagers surviving in tornado-ravaged Ohio. Nas walks in, glances at the screen, and simply says it looks messed up. It's a small moment, but it tells you everything about who Tommy is as a character, someone drawn to chaos and darkness that mirrors his own state of mind. Here's where it gets interesting though. Years later, Harmony Korine directed Spring Breakers, and one of its most memorable sequences is a blacklight heist scene with neon colors and slow-motion violence, which feels like a direct echo of Belly's opening. It's essentially two filmmakers referencing each other across 15 years without ever officially saying so. And it's the kind of connection that only becomes visible once someone actually sits down and compares the two films side by side. Cinema was quietly talking to itself and almost nobody noticed until they went looking for it. Number 6. The year DMX owned everything. To really understand what Belly meant in 1998, you have to understand exactly how big DMX had become by the time it hit theaters. The same year Belly hit theaters, DMX did something that had genuinely never happened before in hip-hop. He released 2 studio albums in a single calendar year, and both of them debuted at number 1 on the Billboard 200. It's Dark and Hell is Hot dropped in May and went multi-platinum, and Flesh of My Flesh, Blood of My Blood followed just 7 months later in December, also debuting at the top of the charts. No artist had pulled off 2 number-1 albums in the same year like that before, and few have matched it since. Somewhere between those 2 releases, Belly landed in theaters in November of 1998, meaning DMX wasn't just a rapper that year, he was genuinely everywhere. Magazine covers, MTV, radio dominance, and now a leading film role, all within about 12 months of being a relative unknown. Very few artists in any genre have managed that kind of complete takeover of a single calendar year, let alone someone who was still a virtual unknown to the mainstream just months earlier. 1998 didn't just belong to DMX, it was basically built around him, and Belly was the visual proof of that takeover. Number 7. The pop star who almost joined the cast. Not every casting decision in Belly ended up on screen, and one of the biggest near misses came from a completely different genre of music entirely. Before filming even started, Hype Williams had someone in mind for a role that that never made it to the screen. He wrote a character specifically for Gwen Stefani, a woman named Buddha, at a time when No Doubt was one of the biggest acts in music thanks to Don't Speak. Having her in a gritty hip-hop crime film would have been a massive crossover statement, but the cameo fell apart before a production wrap. According to one report, the reason was the character's fate in the script, since Buddha was written to be killed off in a violent way, which may have been enough to make her team walk away from the role. Whatever the real reason was, Gwen Stefani stayed firmly in the rock world, and Belly remained a hip-hop film through and through. She wasn't the only high-profile name attached to the project at some point either, since multiple planned cameos never made it into the final cut as the production spiraled into chaos. It's worth pointing out that these details come from secondhand reports rather than an official statement from Stefani's camp, so the exact reason remains more speculation than confirmed fact. Even so, it's a small glimpse into how differently this film could have looked with just one different casting decision. Number 8. The costume designer who predicted the future. The visuals in Belly get most of the credit, but there's an entire layer of the film's influence that comes from something people barely talk about: the wardrobe. Watch the fashion in Belly today, and it doesn't look like 1998. It looks like it was pulled from years later. That was completely intentional. Costume designer June Ambrose, who had already made her mark putting Missy Elliott in an inflated trash bag suit and dressing Diddy and Mace in shiny suits for their videos, was given one directive by Hype Williams: to make the film forecast where hip-hop fashion was headed rather than reflect where it already was. She flew to London and brought back Evisu jeans before most of America had ever heard of the brand, and she used the Echo Rhino logo on screen for what's believed to be the first time. She blended high fashion with streetwear in a way that wouldn't become mainstream for years, dressing DMX in sleek, minimalist black and nace in grounded earth tones, essentially quiet luxury, before that term even existed. Most costume work in film is designed to blend into its decade, but Ambrose was deliberately designing for a decade that hadn't happened yet, which is an almost backwards approach compared to how costume design usually works. Watch the movie today, and the clothes still hold up, which tells you exactly how far ahead of the curve June Ambrose really was. Before we keep going, subscribe if you haven't yet. Drop a comment telling me which movie or show you want me to cover next with strange behind-the-scenes facts. I read every single one. Number 9. The uncredited cameo Nobody Noticed Belly is full of faces that meant nothing to audiences in 1998, but mean a lot more once you know where they ended up. Years before he became the voice of every summer playlist, one future dancehall superstar was quietly standing in the background of this film. Sean Paul appears in Belly completely uncredited, showing up alongside fellow dancehall artist Mr. Vegas during the Jamaica sequences, at a point when almost nobody in America had any idea who either of them were. The two artists also contributed to the soundtrack with a reggae and hip-hop crossover track alongside DMX that most people have completely forgotten existed. Just 5 years after Belly hit theaters, Sean Paul released Duddy Rock and the single Get Busy shot to number 1, turning him into one of the biggest artists on the planet. In 1998, though, he was just a face in the background of someone else's movie, with no credit and no fanfare attached to his name. Dancehall as a genre was still largely unknown to mainstream American audiences at that point, so Belly ended up capturing a scene right before it exploded internationally. It's the kind of blink and you miss it cameo that only becomes interesting once you know what that person eventually became. Number 10. A production held together by duct tape. For a film that looks this polished on screen, what happened behind the camera was almost the complete opposite of polished. Belly almost didn't survive its own production, and the behind-the-scenes chaos was nearly as wild as anything that ended up on screen. Hype Williams clashed with studio executives constantly, blew through the budget almost immediately thanks to that opening tunnel sequence, and still had an entire film left to shoot with dwindling resources. Script pages were thrown out as money ran low, and scenes had to be restructured on the fly just to keep the production moving. It gets stranger too. An acting coach was brought in to help the cast with their performances, and somehow ended up cast in the film himself. When it came time to shoot his scenes, He refused to shave his head for the role, so the crew simply blurred his face instead. If you watch closely, there's a character in the film whose face is literally obscured because of a wardrobe disagreement. On top of that, several planned celebrity cameos fell through entirely as the shoot spiraled further into chaos. Most productions with this level of dysfunction never make it to a finished cut at all, let alone one that ends up studied and referenced decades later, which makes the final result feel almost accidental in the best possible way. Somehow, against every obstacle stacked against it, the team still managed to deliver what became a certified cult classic. Number 11. The real-life leader considered for the final scene. Some of the most powerful casting choices in Belly happened far outside of Hollywood's usual talent pool, and the ending is proof of that. The ending of Belly is one of the most talked about moments in the film, and the man originally attached to deliver it almost changed everything. In the final scene, Tommy walks into a church intending to assassinate a minister, but instead listens to a speech about redemption and choosing a different path. That role ultimately went to Benjamin Chavis, a civil rights leader and former NAACP executive director who helped organize the Million Man March in 1995. But according to reports, Hype Williams originally wanted Louis Farrakhan, the actual leader of the Nation of Islam, for that same role, and Farrakhan was reportedly open to it before eventually backing out for reasons that were never made public. Imagine the real Minister Farrakhan delivering that closing monologue directly to DMX on camera, in a film already blurring the line between fiction and reality. Instead, Benjamin Chavis stepped in and delivered a performance that still resonates with viewers decades later, carrying real weight precisely because it wasn't coming from a trained actor reciting lines. It's a reminder that some of the film's most powerful moments came from blurring the line between actor and real-world figure, rather than from traditional casting choices, a pattern that shows up again and again throughout Belly's production. Either way, that final scene became one of the most powerful endings in hip-hop film history, almost at the end, and the best is still coming. Subscribe so you don't miss what's next, and drop your city or country in the comments. I want to see how far this video is reaching. Number 12. The director who walked away from movies, Forever Belly, is often described as a launching pad for the people who made it, but that description doesn't actually hold up for everyone involved. Here's the strangest part of the entire Belly story, and it has nothing to do with what happens on screen. It's been over 25 years, and Hype Williams has never directed another narrative feature film. Not one. The man behind one of the most visually influential films in hip-hop history simply stopped making movies after this. He stayed at the very top of the music video world, directing for artists like Beyoncé, Jay-Z, and Kanye West, but he never returned to a director's chair for another feature. While directors like David Fincher and Spike Jonze used music videos as a launching pad into Hollywood, Hype went the opposite direction. For years, there were rumors of unmade projects, including a noir film and even a superhero concept, none of which ever left development. Whether it was the chaos of making Belly that scared off studios, or Hype simply refusing to compromise his vision for anyone, the result is the same either way. It's a strange contrast to how the industry usually works, where a visually striking debut is normally treated as a launching pad, rather than a final statement. One of the most innovative visual minds of his generation made exactly one film and then walked away from cinema entirely. Bonus: the theater chain that refused to show it. Everything up to this point has been about what's inside Belly, but this last one is about something that happened entirely outside of it, and it might be the wildest detail on this entire list. When Belly finally hit theaters in November of 1998, not everyone actually got the chance to see it, and the reason is something almost nobody brings up: Magic Johnson. Theaters, a black-owned chain built specifically to bring quality movie experiences to underserved communities, flat out refused to show the film. The stated reason was its negative and violent depictions of African Americans, meaning a black-owned theater chain banned a black film made by black artists about black lives. The decision sparked genuine debate at the time, with some questioning whether Magic Johnson was protecting his community and others wondering if it was closer to respectability politics, especially considering how violent mainstream mob films were treated by comparison without facing the same scrutiny. It's a genuinely rare situation in film history, a movie being frozen out not by outside censors, but by a chain built from within its own community. which is part of what makes this detail so surprising, even to people who consider themselves longtime fans of the film and think they already know everything about it. Despite being locked out of one of the country's most prominent black-owned theater chains, Belly still pulled in close to $10 million against its $3 million budget, proving it didn't need every screen in the country to become a classic. That ban never buried the film, it just became one more chapter in the legend of a movie that refused to play by anyone's rules. And those were 12 strange facts about Belly. This film matters more than people give it credit for, because it captured a moment in hip-hop culture that nobody else was brave enough to put on screen the way Hype Williams did, blending real artists, real struggles, and real spirituality into something that still feels unlike anything else in the genre. More than 25 years later. If you made it this far, leave a like, subscribe, and let me know in the comments which fact surprised you the most. And don't forget to suggest another movie that deserves its own list of strange facts. See you in the next video.